Thank y'all for letting me come. And I'm actually going to take the microphone off, if that's okay. Maybe I'll take the microphone off. I'm excited to be here. I was supposed to be here a couple of weeks ago, and then Pastor Randy decided to get COVID. Yeah, right. I know he planned that on purpose, right? But I'm excited to be here with you today, and I know they're about to put up my PowerPoint, and so, but I just wanted to share with you. I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but y'all are smack in the middle of Dallas and Fort Worth. I know you realize that. But Dallas and Fort Worth is a very, very unique city in Texas, because Dallas and Fort Worth has between 75, depending on how you count the population, between 75,000 and 125,000 Jewish people in y'all's area. I don't know if you realize that or not. And so, in fact, Dallas and Fort Worth has, in the Metroplex, has more Jewish people than Houston. And see, I impressed y'all already. So, and by the way, y'all can react to me. It's okay. I know we're a Baptist church, but it's allowed, okay? And so what I want to speak with you guys today about, just for a few minutes, because I know you're like, oh no, she's a Baptist preacher's kid. She's going to go long. I'm going to try not to. It's just my testimony and what Tzedakah Ministries does. And that's about fearless living in a fearful world. Because I know 2020 and even 2021 already, it's like 2021 is part B of 2020, right? And but we have experienced the fear of 2020, but we don't have to live the 2020 fear. We can go beyond that. And I'm going to share with you my testimony very quickly, and then I'm going to share with you what we have to do to go beyond that. So go to the next slide, and I'm just going to kind of point when I need that. That's my baby picture. I'm the cute one on Daddy's lap. My sister's cute too. I know she might be watching. Janice, you're cute too. But I'm the cute one on my daddy's lap. This was 1970, about March. My mom, I call it the Bouffant Betty hairdo. And this was the first family picture. Yes, if you're old enough to remember, that is a family church directory picture, if you can't tell, from First Baptist Church of Bloomfield, New Mexico, because I am a New Mexican. And I was born in New Mexico, and so I just turned 51 a month ago. I'm 4 years from getting free drinks at Whataburger. I am so excited. And my dad we were upper middle class, and shortly, a couple of years after my dad we took this picture, my dad did the unthinkable. He surrendered to full-time Christian service. So we went from upper middle class to lower class like that. Because that's what it means to surrender to full-time Christian service, right? Yes, y'all, they know. And we went from living in a nice home to seminary housing. Y'all know what that means. So go to the next slide. And that is my kindergarten picture. It was 1976, so you have to have, independent background, Independent Day background. And that was, I think I was 8 years old. I think that was right after I became a believer in Jesus. I'm wearing the white socks, just so you'll know. And my sister is the angry-looking one wearing the green dress. And by the way, if anything ever happens, may we all agree, all of us who are old enough to remember, the fashions of the 70s must never, ever return. Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. And so this was, I think, about a year after I became a believer in Jesus. And Mom and I was, and you have good preachers' kids, you have bad preachers' kids. It's usually because of the deacons' kids. We know that's true. And so My mom was, I think that was our GA picture. We had gone to a GA thing. And of course, Daddy had to drive the bus or the van. And so, I was the good preacher's kid. And so was my sister. I wanted to have that straight. We were good preacher's kids. Mom and Dad got lucky. And so, we were the typical preacher's kids. We moved a lot too. I went to 11 different schools before I graduated high school. Yeah, it was fun. And so I always joke that if I ever wrote the Downey family history, it was going to be titled, Our Second Car Was a U-Haul. And so, but I got to meet a lot of different people. I've lived in 5 different states. I've lived in 30, I counted up once, I lived in 28 different cities. And so I've got to enjoy a lot of different people and a lot of different foods. And so, go to the next slide if you don't mind. This is my high school graduation pictures. By the way, Craig Jones was drunk, just so you'll know. And this was in Leedy, Oklahoma, graduating class of 20. And this was about the time God called me into the ministry. And he called me into full-time Christian service. And I said, God, I will do whatever you want me to do, except be a preacher's wife, because I had done my time, and be a missionary, because my vision of being a missionary was greatly influenced by Lottie Moon, which meant going to a foreign country, being single, and starving to death, and having the Southern Baptist name an offering after you. And I didn't want that from my life. I wanted to not be poor anymore. I wanted to serve God my way. So I went to East Texas Baptist. I got my education degree. I was teaching school, making more than my parents were making at 22. And so I thought, God, I'm going to serve God my way. I'll go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. I'll sing in the choir. I'll tithe off the gross, not the net. I will serve God my way. And see, I can tell who the church treasurer is, because he's like, tithing off the gross, yay. And I was, but I was spiritually miserable. So I went to seminary, and I got my seminary degree. But every time Jerry Rankin was in chapel, I skipped, because I was not going to put myself through that grief, because I knew I was called to missions. So I ended up as a BSM person at a small East Texas college, campus. And kids were getting saved, and kids were surrendering to missions. And I went, good, y'all go, so I don't have to. And then one day, and I'm trying to make this very quickly because I want to get to the point of why I'm here. Because even growing up, I had a heart and a passion for Jewish people, which went back to one of the 11 schools I went to growing up. Because my 6th grade reading teacher, named Miss Ketta Casey, who I'm friends with on Facebook to this day, had us to read the Diary of Anne Frank. And I started reading everything I could about the Jewish people and the Holocaust and Israel. And my dad preached the whole of Romans 1:16, so I don't have to quote that verse for you because he already did. And preached all of Romans 11:11, that our job is to make the Jewish people jealous for Jesus. And even when I thought about missions before the thought of, Lottie Moon got in the way. And so, I love the Jewish people. And one day when I was the BSM person at that small East Texas college, I got home from work, and go to the next slide if you would. Because I was afraid of serving God. I wanted to serve God my way because, if you have those generations, I'm a buster. And busters are known for being afraid of doing anything, of stepping out. And go to the next slide. And could you go to the next slide for me? But because there's that verse in Luke that says if you put your hand to the plow and look back, that you're not fit for the kingdom of God. And that verse always scared me. And that's what busters are. We're known for being fearful. And go to the next slide for me, if you don't mind. But God is a God of a one-track mind. Once he calls you, he doesn't let go. And so one day, I was having my devotional time. And go to the next slide, would you? And my devotional that day was out of Esther 4:14, when Mordecai and Esther are having that conversation through her go-between. And the Jewish people are at risk because of Haman. And Mordecai's telling Esther, you've got to save us because you're married to the king, remember? And Esther's like, I'm afraid, very much like I was at that time. And Mordecai says, well, God is going to save the Jewish people one way or another. And who knows if you have not been called for such a time as this? And I thought, well, that's an interesting devotional. And okay, God, leave me alone. And I went to work. And I was doing my work as a BSM, and I'm serving God my way. And I get home from work that day. And I go through the mail, when we still got mail and it wasn't just email. And I'm going through the mail, and it's, I qualified for another credit card, and Ed McMahon tells me I might win $25 million, and bills and bills. And then there's this letter from Jews for Jesus. And I had supported Jews for Jesus occasionally. But so I open it up, and it said across the top, have you ever felt like God was calling you to missions? That's all it said. And I said, God, this isn't funny. Leave me alone. But I couldn't get rid of that thought. And I said, okay, God, I'll go. And when I said, okay, God, I'll go, I knew immediately to whom. Because of Esther 4:14. Because everything in my life, from Miss Ketta Casey to Daddy's sermons, to even to the master's thesis I wrote at Southwestern, which was the literature of the Holocaust and how it influenced the Jewish people's understanding of God, had prepared me for such a time as this. Go to the next slide for me. And so I left my family. And in fact, if you caught the tail end of Brother Randy's Sunday school lesson, the only people who supported my calling to missions was my mom and dad. The rest of my family thought I was nuts. And that's, by the way, that's the last picture I have with my daddy. Because 6 months after I left to go to New York, my daddy died. He saw me go, and then he went to heaven. And I was there on 9/11, and that's a picture of my mom, Pat, helping me, because she came and would visit with me in New York from time to time. And she passed out tracts with me on 9/11, and I taught Bible studies to older Jewish women on 9/11 in New York, and I walked the streets of New York, and I did Bible studies, and I worked with Holocaust survivors, and I spent 3 of the most difficult years of my life and the most wonderful years of my life in New York City. And my heart to this day grieves for my friends who have lost family members because of COVID in New York City. And as soon as I can get the vaccine, I'm going to do a prayer walk in New York City and visit with my unsaved Jewish friends in New York. But God called me back here to Dallas. And here's why. Go to the next slide. Because God led me to start Tzedakah Ministries. By the way, that's how you spell it, in case you're wondering. Because I realized how you reach Jewish people. Because as many Jewish people as I met in New York City, I would travel when I was raising my support with the ministry I worked with in New York. I would travel and I would meet Christians in churches, and people would come up to me and say, I have a Jewish friend. I have a Jewish coworker. The pastor doesn't know, but my nephew is married to a Jewish girl. Or my niece is married to a Jewish boy, and I don't know how to start the conversation. And God led me to start Tzedakah Ministries to equip you, to equip churches to reach the Jewish people for Jesus. Because as many Jewish people as I meet in my walk, you know more Jewish people as a collective than I will ever know. And if we're going to reach the Jewish people for Jesus, then we have to do it together. Because missions is not just me. It is all of us together. Because Jesus did not call me to be the Jewish missionary. He called all of us to missions. He called all of us to reach the world for the gospel. Missions and evangelism is not a specialty. It is a church call. We all are called to evangelism and missions. Could you go to the next slide for me? This is my life verse. I don't know if you have a life verse. I would encourage you to pray for one. But this is my life verse. But I do not consider my life of any account as dear to myself. And I have to turn around to read it because I want to make sure I read it right. And I can't read that back there. I don't know if y'all have that problem. In order that I may finish my course and the ministry which I received from the Lord Jesus, to testify solemnly of the gospel of the grace of God. That is my life verse. I went from being a terrified buster into somebody else that my family still doesn't recognize. Because my family went, where did the scared Amy go? Because I will start conversations about Jesus in Whataburger now. And in fact, there was a person who worked at Whataburger who is a bisexual Wiccan who now knows how to receive Jesus as her Messiah. Because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to not be afraid for the gospel of Christ because everyone needs to know how to find Jesus. And that is our calling, that is our job, that is our duty. Because it is not about, I've got saved and I'm going to keep the secret to myself. Go to the next slide, would you? So what is the purpose of Tzedakah Ministries? It is to equip you, to equip all of us to reach the Jewish people for Jesus. And why is that so important? And at the end, before Pastor Randy comes back up here, I'm going to show you a short video. But I'm going to make this very personal and very personal to me, and hopefully it will become very personal to you in just a moment. And if you could go to the next slide. But how do we do it? How we do it is we give you the tools to reach the Jewish people with the gospel. In the table in the foyer, there are evangelism tracts, the old-fashioned tracts. And what it does is it gives you the question on the front, and it gives you the answer on the back on how to reach Jewish people with the gospel. And by the way, all of those tracts are free. Because the vision of Tzedakah is our salvation was free, so we should give you the tools for free as well. And we want to educate you on how to do it. We're not going to just say, here's a tract, go and do it. We're going to educate you as well. So we are available 24/7. And in fact, we have an evangelistic website that's called www.exploremessiah.com. It's also .org and .net, but just exploremessiah.com. And we call it the 7 questions that a Jewish person might have that they're too afraid to ask at Passover because they're afraid to kill grandma. And where was God during the Holocaust? You know, can I be Jewish and still believe in Jesus? Those kind of questions. And we want to equip Christians and churches to know why it's important. And then I also believe that the best place for discipleship for new Jewish believers is in the local church. And I know that there's Messianic congregations in the Dallas area, but those often aren't the best places for discipleship. Oftentimes the local Baptist church is the best place for discipleship. So we want you guys to know how to disciple new Jewish believers. And that's how we do it. But go to the next slide. Because this is why it's personal to me. In my now it's going on 21 years of being a missionary to the Jewish people, God has let me meet 8 Holocaust survivors. Last year, the last 2 passed away. But this was the first. I moved to New York on January the 10th of 2000. On January the 11th of 2000, I met Joseph Hausner. I'm going to tell his story very quickly, and then there's a video, and then Pastor Randy. Joseph Hausner was a rabbi, but when the war started. He went to rabbinical school, he received his ordination as a rabbi, and then he went back to his hometown. His mother actually got to see her son be a rabbi. She would have sat on the front row, "My son, the rabbi." His wife, his children, everybody. And he was in Romania, and I have a church history degree. That's what I got at Liberty. And you have to understand, I love history. So I know a lot about the Holocaust, too much. Romania was an ally of Hitler. But they didn't do one thing that Hitler wanted. They did not turn over their Jewish people for the camps. So even though the war was lost, in late 1943, early 1944, even though the war was lost, and Hitler could have used his war resources to fight the war, he invaded Romania and Hungary for one reason and one reason only: for their Jewish population. That's how Elie Wiesel, probably one of the most famous Jewish people besides Anne Frank, that's how he ended up in the camps. Because Joseph's town was not too far from Elie Wiesel's town. They invaded Romania. They invaded Joseph's town. They rounded up all of the Jewish people. And I don't know who's watching, so there might be children watching, so I'll be careful. So they rounded up all of the people in the town, put them on the train, except for Joseph the rabbi and his mother. And they made Joseph watch as they took care of Joseph's mother. I'll leave it at that. They put Joseph on the train after they made sure Joseph watched his mother not get on the train. Took him to the camps in Poland. His wife and his children were taken care of, if you understand my meaning. At the end of the war, Joseph survived. He went back to his hometown, went back to the synagogue, what was left of it, and he waited. He knew his wife was gone. He knew his children were gone. He knew his mother was gone. But he thought, maybe somebody else besides me will come back. No one else came back but the rabbi, Joseph. He went from a rabbi to an atheist by the end of the war. I met Joseph my first day, full day in New York City. He started coming to my ladies' Bible study because he liked me. When my father died and I came back to Texas for Daddy's funeral, and I came back to New York after Daddy's funeral, and I brought Mama back for her to deal with some of her grief issues. Joseph met me my first full day back from Daddy's funeral because he wanted to hug me. He wanted to tell me how sorry he was that Daddy died. And he wanted to tell me that he knew my daddy was in heaven because he had to have been a good man to have a daughter like me, the atheist rabbi. And every chance I got, I would share with Joseph about Jesus, The third night of Hanukkah of 2001 was the last time I saw Joseph. He was dying of kidney cancer. And I went to his apartment. I took somebody with me because it was the appropriate thing to do. And I begged Joseph for an hour and a half to believe in Jesus. And he told me, he said, I know that Jesus is the Messiah, but I also know where my family is, and I cannot go to heaven without my family. January 17th, just over a few weeks ago, Joseph spent his 19th year in hell because he chose to go to hell with his family rather than going to heaven without them. Joseph is buried in Jerusalem because Holocaust survivors can be taken to Jerusalem to be buried. He's buried on Mount Scopus if you've ever been to Israel. I'm the only one that's ever been to Joseph's grave. That's his grave. That is why I do what I do. Because no one should choose to go to hell because they cannot face eternity without their family. But he did. You're going to see a 41-second video that explains to you why the Jewish people need Jesus and why they need him now. And then Pastor Randy will come. Go to the next.